Yeah, I think anyone who gets into the DE space quickly realizes they've now become part salesman. Um, I think a huge part of our job is trying to convince people to do something different, and that is very difficult. Especially there's this mindset that it's always been done this way. This we know this works. Why change? So yeah, that is a hard part. But it's probably not the bit I enjoy the most is getting around going, come on, trust me, this is really good. I'd rather get on and just do it. But you really can't get on and do it until you've convinced people that what you're doing is the right thing to do. So yeah, it's a very important part of the job.
Hi, Alex. Welcome to the Digital Construction Podcast. How are you today?
Good. Thanks, Andre. Thanks for having me.
In this episode, we speak with Alex Harris, digital engineering lead at Bielby. We will talk about navigating BIM and digital delivery from the small contractor's perspective, which is very exciting. Alex is going to share with us real-world lessons in doing more with less, which I think it's useful for everybody, not just small contractors, and what digital success look like in Queensland infrastructure landscape. Queensland is very topical because we know that we have the Olympics in Brisbane in 2032. So I'm very keen to learn more about what's going on in Queensland from your point of view. But before we start, Alex, I have a nice icebreaker for you. What's the best piece of advice you have ever received in your career?
It's been going for a little while now. I think back in my early days at Hatch, I was lucky to work with some really good senior designers. And one of the things they always drilled into us is that don't rush, take your time, get it right mentality. It's basically the old measure twice, cut once idea. Um, I guess I've tried to carry that with me ever since and try and pass that along to younger team members. When you're starting out, there's always this urge to prove yourself by working fast, by submitting things too quickly. You sometimes bring in errors and you're going to cause more rework for others. So I guess it's that case of just slowing down a little bit, do that one more check yourself. It generally saves everyone a bit of time and effort in the long run. I think another way to look at it is to take ownership of what you produce, just to take pride in it. This industry is small. You need to deliver quality outputs. We're often rushed in our work, but we still need to make sure what we deliver is of a high quality.
Yeah, it's a really good one. And today we're talking about small contractors and their perspective, because there is a lot of highlights on large companies, but also I'm keen to speak to you about this topic because you work there. So you've been with Lend-Lease, you've been with Acciona, you've seen a few things. So I guess I want to start asking you, what's the biggest difference? What are the biggest difference between smaller contractors and large contractors when they approach BIM?
I think small as I guess that jack of all trades a little bit. You can't afford to have like the so many specialists around. You've got some in the larger projects. You've got this guy that's just doing this piece of the puzzle, and you've got another one over here doing this piece of the puzzle. When you're smaller, you've got to definitely be a bit more leaner. So you've got to be that jack of all trades. You've got to be hands-on with the tools, but you still need to have that, I guess, that experience and knowledge to sit there at the oversight and the strategy level to really guide things along as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think one practical piece of the puzzle is the digital delivery strategy. Like, how do you tailor a digital delivery strategy for a small contractor into a real project? Because as you mentioned, like when you work in a large company, you probably have one person doing one small thing, another person doing another small thing. But what does a digital strategy looks like in a small contractor?
Well, I guess yeah, like another way to look is like what's the difference between how does BIM different between tier one, tier two? It's I guess again it's tier two is leaner. We don't always have these mega projects to be able to lean on and leverage their huge BIM budgets. And quite often, I guess even though BIM isn't new, it's for us it's not a consistent requirement from all clients yet. So we have to take that less is more approach. the DE team needs to be flexible. Like again, you got to be that jack of all trades. But I think when it comes down to it, I think a tier 2 contractor can still deliver the tier 1 level. It's all about having the right people, about focusing on what matters. I think sometimes when you've got the tier 1 approach, you are looking at some of the big flashy things off to the side, because you kind of showing this big approach of what can be done. I think the tier 2 focus a bit more on what brings value to the project right now. So it's, I guess, yeah, it's trying to focus on those things a bit more.
Yeah, and you're right. Sometimes like smaller contractors can still deliver tier 1 quality. At the end of the day, it's the same people jumping from one company to another. So people like you, they've worked there before.
Exactly, like many of us in Bielby have a tier 1.
Yeah.
Like we leverage that experience and capability. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
the software is the same, the people are the same. It's just a different company sometimes.
that's right.
And are there any BIM frameworks that you find particularly useful?
Um, I I think with any framework, it's important to kind of treat it as a guide, not gospel. You got to ask what's the intent behind it. I think sometimes we can get a bit too caught up in the finer details of some of these frameworks, and you end up arguing about these little details off the side that give no value. Obviously, ISO 9650 is the big one. I generally like the standard. In a simplified view, at its core, it just helps us agree on things like document numbering, model sharing. It makes collaboration easier. Of course, you could do all this without ISO 9650, but the value is just having that shared starting point. You can sit across the table from another company and say, "Are we both following ISO 9650? Great. How often are we sharing models?" You don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. So, yeah, of course, you've got to tailor that, I guess, make sure it makes sense for the project. If something doesn't make sense, you discuss it as a group and just move on.
Yeah, great. And you touched before the point of doing more with less. That's a very interesting concept, and I think in general everybody should do that, right? So trying to optimize, I think it's a way to optimize resources.
Yeah.
But what's your approach from the digital engineering point of view when resources are limited on projects?
Yeah. Again, I think when resources are light, it's that jack of all trades that I mentioned earlier. Like, for instance, if you need to create a starting FBX, jump into InfoWorks, figure it out. If you need to move things around the model quickly, Dynamo is your friend. If you're working across formats like Revit, 12D, Civil 3, you just got to start learning what the inner intricacies of those softwares and getting what you need out of it quickly. Because we work in smaller teams, like being flexible is key, and you've got to be able to push yourself. You've got to be willing to teach yourself new tools and keep at it until you get the result you need. Often the first solution doesn't work. So you've got to pivot and try something else and just keep going. When you're working in small teams, you just need to look for those efficiencies and also probably look for things beyond just that project. I think that mindset probably comes from my design days, where you sometimes spend a little bit more time on a task so it's flexible enough to reuse or adapt for the next job. When you can build something that's scalable or multi-purpose, it usually pays off in the long run. And I guess you've got to also leverage those networks outside your company. Like, I think it's always important to have those connections. Like, I often find when I catch up with old DE colleagues, the conversation always shifts to what challenges are you trying to solve. We're generally curious about the tools and systems, and I think we quite often are very happy to make suggestions. It often turns into that, "Have you tried this?" kind of chat, and just everyone's trying to get to the same level and trying to help each other out, which is really good.
Yeah, it's interesting how there are lots of people working in this industry, but at the end of the day, it feels like a very small community.
It does, yeah.
Always the same people around, which is nice.
Yeah.
And you mentioned just a few like Dynamo and some solution, but can you think of some low cost, high impact digital wins that can be implemented on projects?
Well, it's the flavor of the month or the year. AI is
Mm.
definitely the big one in this space. It's been a real game changer. It's made scripting way more accessible, especially for people who might not be full-time coders but have a solid understanding of what they want to happen. Um, so with AI tools, you can solve problems without needing to invest potentially in commercial platforms, which I think it's been really amazing. Like we've been able to push like scripts that check IFC files, push data into IFC files. You just run the script and you don't have to open up any heavy software or manually step through processes. It's in some cases, yeah, it's just meant we've been able to avoid buying software altogether, which has been really good. Um, yeah, on projects without the budget for full collaboration platforms, we've also used like things like Navisworks, just clash detection. It's cost effective. Creating Dynamo like little nodes to show where all the clashes are on the model, and so someone can see it in a freedom model is pretty useful too. So I guess yeah, these kind of small targeted things, they're very low cost and they can have a big impact for a project.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like using AI to avoid buying other software packages. That's interesting. It's a very interesting application. Yeah, good point. And one of the questions I have, it's relates to the what's good enough, right? Because you are working on a project, you have time constraints, budget constraints. At some point, you need to decide what's good enough without sacrificing quality. How do you manage that?
That old age, perfect is the enemy of good. You want to make sure things are as accurate as possible, but only to the level of that adds value. So I guess the good fallback is the LODs. Um, there's no point building a highly detailed geometry model that's only going to go into a data set that requires the general properties or general dimensions. So I guess what matters most is that the model represents that object clearly and the key interfaces are accurate. It doesn't mean I'm advocating for a very crude geometry. It still needs to be recognizable and useful. But things like internal product connections, highly detailed hardware, that's just all noise if no one's using it. Um, I think it's also important to keep in mind what that deliverables for. If it's a prelim submission, it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to communicate the right intent. But if it's for formal submission, then you probably need to be a bit more accurate.
Interesting, yeah. And so you're based in Queensland, and for the listeners that are outside of Australia, Queensland is a state of Australia. Um, Capital is Brisbane, and we have when we think about the time that it takes to build infrastructure projects, the Brisbane Olympic in 2032 are just around the corner. So it's coming very quickly, and I'm very keen to understand from your point of view what's the current state of digital engineering in Queensland. So you worked in small companies, large companies. What do you think about the current state of digital engineering in your state now?
I think Queensland's digital engineering space isn't too different to the rest of Australia. The major push is still coming from state government clients. They're the ones driving BIM and DE requirements forward. But I think because of that, we're starting to see DE recognized as a genuine value add on projects as a whole. Um, your smaller private clients and councils aren't quite there yet. We're seeing glimpses, little signs of DE starting to come into projects. Um, but I think one thing that's interesting is like it may be state-based clients that are driving it, but a lot of the people doing the work are working across multiple states. So you're starting to see little things that come in from, let's say, New South Wales or Victoria brought into Queensland, and I'm hoping vice versa as well. It's a bit of a knowledge share as this whole thing's building up, and I think it's, I guess, Speaking of that building up, it's really good to see that the bar is rising. Each major project pushes the boundaries just a little bit more, and I think they trial something new, they feed that back into the next round of client requirements. BIM expectations we saw like 5 years ago is worlds apart from what we're seeing now. And I think credit goes to some of the people driving this. They're generally pretty open to listening to industry and getting that feedback and making things change for the better.
Yeah, that's great. And When I think about Queensland, one of the advantages that I can think of is the fact that in working in this specific region is the fact that you can really tap into talents that is distributed all around Australia or in the Asia Pacific region. So can you think of any other maybe unique challenges or advantages in working in this specific region?
I haven't worked in every other region to compare. I've worked in a few different states, but I think one thing that does stand out with Queensland is the geographic spread. So we are a large state, so the population spread across quite a distance. I think you're generally seeing the D adoption or BIM adoption focused probably more around the southeast of the state. But I think the different regions, they definitely got different levels of maturity, but I think this also creates opportunities because when D is done well in one part of the state, it sets a precedent and lifts up the standard elsewhere. So I wouldn't say Queensland's radically different in its challenges. The regional spread and concentration of work definitely shapes how D is rolled out here.
Queensland is such a large state with a relatively
Yeah.
small number of people if you compare with other parts of the world where the density of population is a lot higher. In Queensland, we don't have a lot of people considering considering the size of the land, even if Australians complain about the cost of the land. One of the things that we always talk about when we talk about digital engineering is the fact that all of the parties need to be aligned in terms of expectations. So how do you find the alignment between contractors, consultants, and even the clients? Clients are critical in this puzzle. Do you think that they are aligned with the expectation that we have for digital engineering at the moment, or we need to educate them more?
I think most parties are generally aligned on the fundamentals, but the finer details, there's definitely quite a lot of differences still. I think that's also partly because of like we're shaped by our own experiences. So if your last major project was an infrastructure job working to DE standards set years ago, your expectations might be different to someone who's just starting on a new project with the latest requirements. And as you know, tools and processes change over time. So I think what used to feel like extra effort is now becoming standard practice. For example, the ISO 9650 concept we talked about earlier, like and managing clash detection, numbering documents correctly, embedding attributes, that no longer feels foreign, even though it may not be the default on projects. I guess to answer your question a bit more, breaking it down onto the specifics. So the contractors, I think the tier ones are pretty well aligned across the board now. They're all doing very similar things. The tier twos, I think that's at varying stages right now. We've got some like Bielby who are investing in their own DE teams, which is great to see. Others are still potentially relying on JV partners or subcontractors for delivery. Your smaller players, like in the tier three space, probably aren't really in the BIM area yet, simply just because their projects don't require it. Regarding consultants, they're pretty aligned. Like they're mostly specialists in their domain. So if they don't stay current, they don't really remain competitive. If they're not up to speed, they tend to fall behind quickly. And yeah, I think like you mentioned, clients, well, I think that's where the alignment varies the most. Your state level bodies are increasingly pushing for DE and BIM adoption, but councils and small clients are less consistent. And like asset owners like a transport or a water authority, they have very different needs and a long history of managing their assets, so their expectations differ. And private clients, well, they have their entirely different motivations. So I think the less developed clients will benefit from the broader state level momentum that we have. As the business as usual shifts, I think DE will become more embedded, whether it's formally mandated or not. Like back when I was at Hatch, we modeled everything in, even though deliverables was only 2D. It was more about ensuring things fit and were coordinated properly. So I think that infrastructure is getting close to that mindset. I think the 3D by default is nearly there. The basic attribution is following. The detailed LOI is still heavily reliant on client requirements, though.
Interesting. And one other aspect I would like to touch is the importance of having this experience that goes across multiple disciplines, because you have worked in plant layout, mechanical, fabrication. You've done different things in your career. And I just wanted to ask you, how has your experience in other disciplines shaped your perspective on digital engineering?
Yeah, I think my multidiscipline experience has helped me look at things from different perspectives. When I was on the design side, it was often smaller teams within a larger team. So there's that bit of friendly competition, each discipline trying to carve out their part of the project. Everyone had a view on why their component needed to occupy a certain space or have take priority. Some parts of the design just feel harder to shift. So maybe because they've always done things a certain way, they're physically locked in early, that can lead to mindset that change isn't always possible. But I've found that having those discussions with the right people and just a genuine airing of concerns can even make the less flexible disciplines provide options. And look, not everything can move. I understand that there are sometimes real constraints, but I think if there's that genuine benefit to the project, if the conversation should at least be had to try and get to the bottom of some of these things. And I think that kind of mindset of being open to discussions and compromise really stuck with me. Like working across multiple disciplines taught me how to negotiate and find that common ground. Most people generally want to deliver the best project they can. But what's efficient for one group can create challenges for another. So that's why coordination is so important. You can't afford to have teams working in silos. And I guess that same dynamic shows up in the DE space too. Sometimes we're working to meet specific requirements that generally are hard to achieve and it can feel rigid. But again, a good discussion usually helps. I think a healthy project is full of compromises, and when no one's willing to budge, it tends to hurt the outcome. So collaboration is key.
And do you find it easier to empathize with various stakeholders just because of your broad technical background? You understand them better, maybe?
I think so. Um, like for instance, design and construction operate in very different worlds. Construction often sits in the middle. Sometimes we're the client to the designer. Sometimes we're just building what we've been given to us. Um, those relationships shift all the time depending on the type of contract and how people move around. Like we mentioned earlier, like someone might be your client one day and then the designer the next. Like it's a very fluid industry. I always try and look at things from the other person's perspective, and having worked across different parts of the project life cycle really helps with that. I've been on the design side. I know how frustrating change can be, especially late change. I keep that in mind when I'm talking to designers. I also understand that some things are more doable than others. Again, it's just all about having those conversations.
Is there anything particular you have learned from your fabrication and plant layout days that still applies today in infrastructure?
The fabrication work I did, I think, really sharpened my eye for detail, especially around like QA of drawing production. I try not to get too deep into drawing reviews these days, but if I do spot something that I do tend to dig in and figure out what's going on. I'm sure I've annoyed a few designers who think the DE guy shouldn't be checking drawings. But for me, it's about making sure those deliverables are consistent and reliable. It's a bit of a callback to that old advice of measure twice, cut once. A small mistake on a drawing can be that thread that unravels a whole bunch of other things. Um, yeah,
That's
as
a
the
good point. Yeah.
yeah.
And one of the challenges we see often is from BIM leaders is or digital engineering leaders is try to convince teams and even the leadership within the business to embrace new ways of working. Do you find that challenging? How do you convince them if you want to change things?
Yeah, I think anyone who gets into the DE space quickly realizes they've now become part salesman. Um, I think a huge part of our job is trying to convince people to do something different, and that is very difficult. Especially there's this mindset that it's always been done this way. We know this works. Why change? So yeah, that is a hard part. But it's probably not the bit I enjoy the most, is getting around going, come on, trust me, this is really good. I'd rather get on and just do it. But you really can't get on and do it until you've convinced people that what you're doing is the right thing to do. So yeah, it's a very important part of the job.
Yeah, definitely. And thinking about the future of digital engineering, particularly infrastructure, but for small contractors like these tier two contractors, what excites we talked about AI a little bit, but what excites you the most about the future of digital construction in this space?
Yeah, definitely AI. But I guess apart from that, we've got like I'm excited about some of the new players that are entering the market. We're not just dominated by the big software vendors anymore. Like they definitely take the lion's share of the market, but there's some small companies starting to challenge the status quo and bring some real value to projects. I think that competition is really healthy and it's pushing innovation, which is great. Also pretty excited about the shift in education. Some of our younger engineers are starting to learn digital engineering concepts at university, which is going to make a big difference on site. I'm hoping it leads to more local champions, those people that are embedded in the project who really drive DE forward, because without them, DE can end up being perceived as this thing off to the side, not really part of the project. But when it's embraced locally, it really becomes part of how we build.
Yeah, definitely. And thinking about emerging technology, is anything you are keeping an eye on at the moment that you want to share with us?
Um, my focus is largely around AI at the moment.
Yeah, okay.
But I guess some of the other things, it's the Gaussian splats, I think are pretty interesting. Don't ask me exactly how it all works, but that's around the photogrammetry or new way of doing photogrammetry, basically. I think there's some real benefits there around the visualization. Collaboration platforms are another area that I'm watching closely. There's a few solid ones out there already, and others still finding their feet. I think that space is going to get really competitive, and which is good. And I guess from a lean to delivery mindset, I'm always looking for a new tool to make things work a little bit better. I'm particularly interested in like Bonsai at the moment. I haven't been able to give it too much space yet, but that's all around that working with IFC files, and I think in the near future there's going to be a lot more focus around that IFC deliverable, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, thanks for that. So we are at the end of today's episode, and this was a great episode, Alex. If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Just the normal ways. LinkedIn's probably the best to get me. I'll try my best to respond. I'm not always the best at getting back to you straight away, but yeah, that's probably the easiest way.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, for sharing your practical advice and your point of view, particularly from the small contractors' point of view, with all of your experience, even in larger companies as well. So thank you again.
Thanks, Andrea.
Bye.
See ya.